Hello everyone, I am Manju. It is a continuation of my another session of active and passive voice. If you recollect, in my previous session, I told you the importance of active and passive voice. What is active and passive voice? Where it is used, why it is used, and how it is used. Now I am going to tell you that how you are going to use active and passive voice and what is the important key feature that you have to keep it in mind when you are changing an active voice to passive voice. So in active voice, you are very clear from my previous video that active means action, and you are talking about the information or the action of the subject, and the subject which is a doer. Whereas in passive voice, the action is being done onto the object, which is a victim of the action. You have to only and only understand, or you have to only and only tell whether the action is done in passive sentences. Now, what is important is that you have to identify that this is an active sentence and this is a passive sentence. Now, how will you identify that this particular sentence is active and this is a passive? A sentence in which you are talking about the subject or the doer, it is an active sentence, right? And in a sentence where you are talking about the object, that the work is being done or the object is, or the action is completed by this object, that is passive. Now, very important part that comes in active and passive voice is that every active voice, that every sentence of tense, if you ask me, that is an active sentence. So, every active sentence cannot be changed into passive sentence. Yes, you have understood me correct. Every active sentence cannot be changed into passive. And this is where the trick lies, that during the examination what happens is that the examiner sets certain questions in such a manner that he wants you to change the active voice into passive, and you start thinking to change, but in fact that active sentence cannot be changed into passive. Now the question arises, why and how? This is where I'll explain you the importance of a verb which is called transitive and intransitive verb. See, verbs, as you know, has got different forms and they are used in different tenses differently, and they have got finite and non-finite modes. But as such here, in active and passive voice, the verb which we are talking is defined into the category of transitive and intransitive verbs. Now, it is very, very important first to understand the meaning of the word. Now, when I say transitive verb, of course, you all know what is a verb. Verb is a word which tells about the subject, what the subject is, what the subject does, and what the subject has, right? So that is verb. Now, a transitive verb. Now, transitive is added to that word. So now what is this verb? Transitive word itself, the word means transfer. Transitive verb means transfer. T-R-A-N-S, trans. Trans means transfer. Prefix trans means transfer. That means change from one form to another. That means, for example, transform, transient, transcript. So, any prefix when you see it is trans, that means transfer. So, transitive verb, in this case, transitive means transfer. So, transitive verb means action. So, it shows the action of subject, it passes from subject to object. Means the verb here will definitely require an object to complete the sense of the statement, or you can say the subject will require a transitive verb in which the verb will require an object to complete the statement. That means trans means transform. So, transform means the action of the verb requires an object to get the meaning clear and complete. So, this is transitive. So, you have to understand that what type of verb it is. If it is a transitive verb, that means the another important key factor here is you have to understand that after the verb, if there is an object, yes, object means whether it is noun or a pronoun case, then it is a transitive verb. So, immediately what you can do is you can change active into passive, right? Intransitive. Now, intransitive means in means not, non-trans. The prefix in means non, not. So, means it is not transferred. It denotes that action that stops with the subject, means the action, it stops with the subject. The verb does not require an object to complete the statement. If there is any word after the verb, it is not an object. In that case, it can be any other part of speech, for that matter, adverb, but it will not be an object that is noun or pronoun form in intransitive verb. This is what you have to actually understand to change active verb into passive form. For example, if I give you now, for example of transitive, he writes a letter. He writes a letter. Now, action about the subject is given or asked, means what he writes. That means what the subject does, what the action the subject does. So, that means this is a transitive verb, means he writes. If you only say he writes, that means the statement is incomplete. You will require an object after the verb to complete the statement. So, that means the action of the subject will always require an object. That means verb requires an object to complete the statement. That means the transfer of an action from verb into object. So, he writes an action, means action about the subject is given or asked. And in simple words, you can understand that if you are asking about the action of the subject, that what does he do? Has he done it or has he not done it? So, when you are asking or inquiring or giving information about the subject, that means it is a transitive verb and then you can change. Correct? Now, here in intransitive form, when you say wind blows with great speed. So, what are you doing here? You are only and only giving information about the wind, that how the wind blows. That means the verb does not require any object to complete the statement. It is only an information about the subject. Nothing to do as far as verb is concerned. So that means it is intransitive verb. So if it is an intransitive verb, in that case you cannot change this particular sentence into a passive statement. You have to remember this, you have to understand this, that every sentence of active cannot be changed into passive. You have to keep it in mind that whether the verb is transitive or the verb is intransitive. Transitive means transfer. The action of the subject you are asking or speaking requires an object. अगर उसके पीछे object लगा है, then it can be changed. If the subject does not require an object and the statement is only talking about or giving an information about the subject, that means it is intransitive verb. You cannot change it into passive. Please keep it in mind. Transitive, very important part. Transitive verbs asks questions what, whom, like what he does, what he did, what he will do. So means a question about an action of the subject is asked. And second is who has done it, means action is done or action is going to be done, or you will do the action, or he does the action. So who is that person? It is done by whom. So when you are addressing whom, this job will be done or by whom this in future course it will be taken up, then you will use transitive verbs, and verb requires object to complete the action. Intransitive verb asks the question where, how, who, what, means it is talking about only the information about the subject. Now with certain examples I will make you understand what exactly intransitive verbs are. Like suppose Ajay went to hostel. Ajay went to hostel. Now what we are talking about? Where did Ajay go? Where did Ajay go? So Ajay went to hostel. So we are only giving an information about Ajay. So you cannot change this statement into passive. Now second, Ajay slept at 9 p.m. So Ajay slept means again you are talking about giving the information about Ajay of time, that when did Ajay sleep? Slept at 9 p.m. right? Then the third is Ajay writes well. So now you are talking about what? You are talking about how Ajay writes. He writes well. Modi speaks to rural population in Mann Ki Baat. So that means who speaks to rural population in Mann Ki Baat every time? It is our Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi. So who? Now Modi asks people to maintain hygiene, right? So what does he ask? Ajay studies to clear the NEET exam. So what does Ajay study? So what does Ajay study means? It is Ajay studies to clear. That means why Ajay studies. So this is intransitive verbs. Now what you have to note here in this session, that if you want to change active voice to passive voice, you have to see the verb form, whether it is transitive or intransitive. Is it clear? Transitive and intransitive. Transitive means when you are talking about the action of the subject and you require an object after the verb, that means it is a transitive verb. And when you are only giving an information about the subject, the verb do not require any object behind it, that means it is intransitive verb. In intransitive verb, action of the subject, the doer is asked or spoken, that who, what, when, where, how, etc. the subject does. Now, in transitive verb, what the action is done. In intransitive verb, what is the action that is done. So, importance of the action that is done, because it is very important to understand in transitive that there is an action which has happened in the object and you are talking about that action. You want an information about that action. You want to ask about that action. You want to tell something about that action. That means the victim is the object. So you have to have an object after this particular verb to complete the statement. That is what is transitive verb, and this what makes your active voice change into passive voice. Action on the subject is asked or spoken, means action on object is asked or spoken. And number third is, if it is done by whom? It is done by whom? So this is transitive form of verbs. So you have to understand in today's session is that in active and passive voice, in active it is all about the action of the subject, and the verb you will need here is a transitive verb. That means this particular verb requires an object to complete the statement. It is an information about the work that is done. It is an information asked about the action that is done. So that means the action is very important. So if action is important, you have to have an object, that in this object, particular object, the action has been done. And in intransitive, there is just an information about the subject's action, that the birds fly, the dog barks, okay, the people ask questions, people are worried. So these are the verbs where the information only of the subject is given. You do not further require an object, or any action is not done in an object. It is only and only an information about the subject. So in these two sessions, what you have understood is, yes, you have understood what is active actually and what is a passive voice, what is important of active voice and what is an importance of passive voice. Right? Why passive is important when you are giving an information about the action that has been done to everyone. And in that, what are you going to identify? You are going to identify the verb form, transitive and intransitive verb form. These two verb forms identify whether you are talking about an active sentence or you are talking about a passive voice. Understood? So this is what is the second session of my active and passive, where you have understood the concept of transitive and intransitive verbs. Now in my following sessions, you will come to know that what are the different rules that we need to keep it in mind to change active into passive, because there are different types of tenses in active voice. What are the points that you have to keep it in mind when you are changing a particular tense into another tense? What are the different types of prepositions that you are going to use when you are going to change this particular active sentence into this passive. So until then, see you for my next session with Manju, and stay tuned to Heron Academy. Follow me on my Facebook and Instagram page, and visit my website at www.heronacademy.net.